When my husband George passed away, I thought the worst was over. Grief was already something heavy, but I never imagined that the real pain would come from my own son. 2 days after the funeral, I was sitting at the kitchen table holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold when Robert walked in with his wife, Melissa. He didn't sit. He stood by the counter, arms crossed like a manager about to fire someone. "We went through Dad's things," he said flatly. "There's no will. He didn't leave anything behind, so you can stop asking." Melissa didn't say a word at first. She just leaned against the refrigerator and looked at me like I was some confused old woman who had overstayed her welcome. Then she added, with that tone she always used when pretending to be sweet, "It's better to let go. He probably thought of you, but legally, there's nothing." We checked. "Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing." I kept staring at my cup. I didn't say anything. Not then. Not when Robert pushed a folder toward me with some printed bank statements that showed empty accounts. Not when Melissa mentioned how tight things were for them financially. Now that George was gone, they offered to let me stay in the house for a while, but only until I figured something out. The house George and I built together. I nodded. I even thanked them. I was too numb to argue. The only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator and Robert's tapping fingers against the marble countertop. They didn't even try to hide what they wanted. 2 days after they told me there was nothing, Melissa started talking about renovations. She said the kitchen would look great with new cabinets and that maybe the sunroom should be converted into a nursery. She spoke like she already lived there. George had been sick for a long time. We had time to talk before the end. He had promised me, over and over, that he had taken care of everything. He didn't want Robert to have access to all of it, he said. He didn't trust how Melissa whispered in his ear. He said he made sure I'd be protected, but I believed Robert. I thought maybe George had simply run out of time. I stayed quiet, even when I noticed that the car title had changed names. Even when Robert showed me papers from the bank that proved everything had already been signed over before George passed. I stayed quiet through the weeks of cold meals and awkward silences. I stayed quiet when they started talking in front of me like I wasn't there. And then, 3 weeks later, I found the letter. It was early morning. I was alone in the house. I couldn't sleep, so I got up to make tea. I was pulling out the tray from behind the spice rack. One George had built himself into the wall. His little, secret corner, he called it, when something shifted behind it. I reached in and felt paper. I pulled it out carefully. A plain envelope. My name written on the front in his handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded 3 times. "Susan, if you are reading this, then you know something is wrong. If they told you I left nothing, they're lying. I've hidden the original will and instructions in a safe place. Trust no one, especially not Robert. Follow the instructions I left in the basement wall. The panel behind the breaker. 3 taps, lift from the bottom. I love you." My knees almost gave out. I held the letter for a long time. My hands were shaking. I read it again and again, trying to make sure I wasn't imagining it. It was his handwriting. It was his voice in my head. I remembered how he always warned me, "Never sign anything Robert gives you without checking first." He had said that so many times in the last few months, and I had signed anyway. Some of the bank forms. Melissa had watched over my shoulder like a hawk. I moved toward the basement before I even realized I was walking. I hadn't been down there in months. George used to keep tools, gardening supplies, and old storage boxes in the corner. The light bulb flickered when I pulled the string. The breaker panel was where it always was, near the stairs, half hidden behind an old metal shelf. 3 taps. I hesitated. Then I knocked. 1, 2, 3. Nothing happened at first, but then I saw it. 2 tiny screws were missing. The bottom panel slid up just enough for me to grip it. Behind it was a long black envelope. Inside were copies of documents, George's last will and testament, notarized. A copy of the deed to the house, in my name. A list of asset transfers and a letter from George's lawyer, explaining where the originals were stored. A fireproof box at the Wells County law firm. The lawyer's name, Alan Peters. George had done everything he said he would, and Robert had lied. I felt something break open inside me. Not grief, not shock, not fear, something else. Cold, focused. I stood there for a long time. My hands were dirty, my hair a mess, but I wasn't trembling anymore. The next morning, I made an appointment. Alan Peters hadn't heard from me in years, but when I called, the secretary put me through immediately. I told her I found a letter, that I had questions about a will. She said, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." Mr. Peters left specific instructions. "We've had the documents ready." He even warned us that someone might try to suppress them. I hung up and stared at the wall. That evening, Robert came home and tossed his jacket on the couch like he owned the place. Melissa followed, holding 2 grocery bags and talking about some patio furniture she wanted to order online. "I hope you didn't touch the spice rack," she said. "I'm moving it next week." I smiled. "That's fine, move it wherever you like." She paused, suspicious. "But I just walked upstairs." They didn't know I had already spoken to the lawyer. They didn't know I had the will. They didn't know that everything was about to change. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The copy of George's will tucked safely in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. My mind kept turning over everything. His warning in the letter, the calm way Robert had lied to my face, the papers Melissa had pushed toward me without a second thought. I thought about every time I'd second-guessed myself, every time I told myself I was overreacting, or too tired to argue, or just grieving. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't confused anymore. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into Alan Peters' office. It was a small building, a brick 2-story near the courthouse downtown. His assistant, a kind woman named Nora, greeted me with a tight smile. "He's been expecting you, Mrs. Harris." Inside, Alan Peters stood when I entered. His hair was mostly gray now, and he wore the same round glasses he had back when George and I signed the first deed to the house 35 years ago. He looked exactly the same, like someone you could trust. "Susan," he said, offering his hand. "I wish it were under better circumstances." I sat across from him and placed the black envelope on his desk. "I found this in the basement." Alan nodded and opened a locked drawer on his left. He pulled out a thick file and slid it toward me. "George left a full estate plan. He was worried. He told me more than once that your son and his wife were pressuring him. He didn't want you to be caught off guard." I opened the file. The original will was there, with signatures, witness statements, and the notary's seal. George had left everything: our home, his retirement savings, 2 investment accounts, and the small vacation lot in Clearwater, in my name. There was no mention of Robert anywhere in the will. "When did he sign this?" I asked. "About 7 months before he passed. He updated it when he started chemotherapy. And Robert, he has no legal claim. The house, the bank accounts, everything was placed in your name. Your husband was clear. He wanted to make sure no one could touch it after he was gone." I sat back in the chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "So what happens now?" Alan folded his hands. "You can file a petition to probate the will immediately. Once it's filed, Robert will receive a formal notice. If he contests, we'll have to go through a court hearing. But given what I have here, he won't win." He paused. "There's something else. Your name is still on the deed, but there was a quitclaim filed a few weeks after George died. It transferred the title of the house to Robert's name." My stomach dropped. "I didn't sign that." "I know," he said, "but someone did. I've already contacted a forensic specialist. We'll run a handwriting analysis. If it's forged, we'll press charges." That's when it stopped being sad and started becoming infuriating. I wasn't just cut out, I was erased, and they thought I wouldn't notice. That evening, I walked back into the house like everything was normal. Melissa was in the living room watching a reality show. Robert was out back watering the plants like he was doing me a favor. I stood behind him quietly for a moment. "Did you really think I'd never find it?" He turned slowly. "What are you talking about?" "The will," I said. "The real one. The one George filed with Alan Peters. You remember him, don't you?" His face didn't change, but his hands did. He set the watering can down too fast, and some of the water splashed against the patio bricks. "You're confused." "No, Robert, I'm not. But I think you are. You're confused if you think you're getting away with this." He stared at me. His jaw moved slightly, but no words came out. I walked back inside without another word. The next morning, I served him. Alan arranged a process server to deliver the formal notice of probate. Robert answered the door. Melissa was standing behind him in a robe, holding a cup of coffee. The man handed him the envelope and said simply, "Susan Harris has filed a petition to validate the will of the deceased, George Harris." Melissa slammed the door before Robert could say anything. They didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. That afternoon, Nora called me. "You'll want to see this." She forwarded an email. It was from a real estate agent. Melissa had scheduled a private showing for our home. She listed it online, without my permission. "I have a copy of the MLS listing," Nora said. "We're attaching it to the court documents. You'll want to change the locks as soon as you can. Tomorrow, we file an emergency motion to freeze any transfer of ownership." That night, I stood outside the bedroom that used to be mine and George's. Melissa had taken over the closet. My pictures were gone from the dresser. Even the quilt I made by hand was stored in a plastic bin in the garage. I went to the kitchen. I took a pen and wrote a note on the fridge. "I won't be here when you wake up. Don't touch my things. The locks will be changed by noon." Then I packed my suitcase. By the time the locksmith arrived the next day, I was already at the courthouse with Alan. We filed everything: the motion to freeze the deed, the petition for forgery review, and the emergency protection order that would block any sale of the house until the probate was resolved. Melissa called me that afternoon. Her voice was tight. "You didn't have to do it like this." "Neither did you," I replied. She hung up. The next few days were quiet, too quiet, but Alan warned me that quiet was never a good sign, and he was right. On Monday morning, Robert filed his response. He was contesting the will. He claimed George was under mental duress, and that I had manipulated him into signing everything over. He listed George's cancer treatments and medications as evidence that he was not of sound mind. He also claimed that I forged the will. I was sitting in Alan's office when we read the filing. He leaned back in his chair, annoyed but not surprised. "They're trying to flip it on you. That means we move forward with the handwriting expert. And Susan," he looked me straight in the eye, "you're going to need to testify." "I will," I said. "I'm not scared of him anymore." And I meant it. George may have passed, but I could still protect what he left me, what was rightfully mine. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it because I had allowed too many people, for too long, to treat me like I didn't matter. That was over. The first court date was scheduled 2 weeks later. Until then, the house stayed quiet, too quiet, like everyone inside was holding their breath. I stayed in the guest bedroom and avoided Robert and Melissa as much as possible. We spoke only when necessary, and even then, only in short, cold sentences. I cooked my own meals, kept the kitchen clean, and spent most of my time in my room with the door locked. On the surface, it looked like we were just 3 people sharing a house. Underneath, it was a war. The day before the hearing, I went to Alan's office for the final prep. Nora greeted me with her usual calm efficiency, handed me a bottle of water, and showed me to the conference room. Alan was already seated at the head of the table, with a large folder open in front of him. "We've got everything in order," he said as I Saturday, "the forensic handwriting report came back this morning. The signature on the quitclaim deed is not yours. It's a forgery." I let out a small breath of relief. I already knew it in my heart, but seeing it confirmed on paper gave me something real to hold on to. "That alone won't win the case," Alan continued, "but it gives us leverage. The judge will see the pattern. First they hide the will, then they forge a deed, then they claim mental duress to take control of the estate. It's a chain. Will I have to face them in court?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Robert's going to try to make this personal. He'll try to rattle you. But don't take the bait. Just tell the truth. You don't need to defend your character. You just need to show that George knew what he was doing, and that you're carrying out his wishes." I nodded. "I'm ready." The courtroom was small. No jury, just the judge and a few observers sitting in the back. I wore a navy blue sweater and slacks. Nothing flashy. Melissa wore a beige dress with a silk scarf. Robert showed up in a dark suit he had probably borrowed. He never wore one unless it was a wedding or a funeral. He didn't look at me once. Judge Franklin called us to order right at 9 a.m. Alan stood and opened with the petition to validate the will. "We are here today because the decedent, George Harris, left a clear and properly executed last will and testament," Alan said, voice firm but controlled. "The will was hidden after his death, and our client, Mrs. Susan Harris, discovered it only after being told that her husband left her nothing. Since then, we have obtained a handwriting analysis proving that a forged document was filed to illegally transfer property that rightfully belongs to her." The judge turned to Robert's attorney, a man named Mr. Carter. I'd never seen him before. He was young, confident, and spoke with the ease of someone who enjoyed the sound of his own voice. "Your Honor, we dispute the authenticity of the will," Carter said. "We believe Mr. Harris was not of sound mind when he signed it, and that Mrs. Harris used undue influence during a vulnerable period. Furthermore, we believe that George Harris had expressed intentions to transfer the house to his son prior to his passing, and we will present evidence to support that claim." I looked at Robert. His expression didn't move. "No guilt, no hesitation, just cold confidence." The judge nodded. "We'll proceed with testimony." I was called first. Alan led me through the basics: how George and I had been married for 43 years, how we had jointly owned the house since 1989, how he was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago, and how we had spoken at length about the will before he passed. Then Carter stood and began his cross. "Mrs. Harris, you say your husband was of sound mind when he signed the will?" "Yes. But he was undergoing chemotherapy at the time, wasn't he?" "Yes. And taking medications that affected his memory?" "No," I said clearly. "He was tired, sometimes weak, but he was mentally sharp." "Did he ever forget things?" "He forgot where he left his glasses sometimes." "That's not the same thing." Carter smiled like he had me cornered. "Isn't it true that your son Robert was helping manage George's finances during the last months of his life?" "He offered," I said, "but George didn't accept. He said he didn't want Robert involved." Do you have proof of that? Yes, I said, and I reached for my bag. Alan handed me the copy of George's handwritten letter, the one I found behind the spice rack. This is in George's handwriting. He warned me not to trust Robert. It was dated and sealed before he passed. The judge examined the letter, then looked back at Carter. We'll allow it. Carter didn't ask any more questions. The next person called was the handwriting expert, who testified that my signature had been forged on the quitclaim deed. Then came Alan, who confirmed that George had revised the will in his presence, had been mentally competent, and had been clear in his instructions. The judge adjourned for lunch, saying he would review the documents before reconvening. I walked outside to get some air. The courthouse steps felt steeper than usual, but I forced myself to move slowly and stay calm. Alan walked beside me. You held up well, he said. I feel like I'm holding my breath. He nodded. That's normal. They're cornered, Susan. They know it. When we returned, the judge took less than 10 minutes to deliver his ruling. The court finds the will submitted by Mrs. Harris to be valid, Judge Franklin said. There is sufficient evidence that Mr. George Harris was of sound mind when he signed it. The claim of undue influence is rejected. Furthermore, the forged quitclaim deed is vacated. Full ownership of the property and all listed assets are restored to Susan Harris as per the will. I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. Melissa leaned forward and whispered something to Robert. He didn't respond. They stood up and walked out without looking at me. I stayed seated until the courtroom was empty. Alan leaned toward me. You did it. No, I said. George did. I just finished it. We filed the court orders to update the deed back into my name that afternoon. Alan gave me certified copies to keep at home, and I stored one in the fireproof safe we kept under the staircase. Back at the house, I found Robert in the living room with a packed suitcase. I just need a few days to figure things out, he said, avoiding my eyes. I looked at him evenly. You have 1 hour. He didn't argue. Melissa didn't come home that night. I changed the locks the next morning, and for the first time since George passed, I sat at the kitchen table, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. It wasn't over. I knew they would try something else. But this time, I was ready. They underestimated me. The quiet after the court ruling didn't last long. A week after Robert left the house with his suitcase, the phone calls started. At first, it was just him, twice a day, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to passive-aggressive. Mom, I know we had our differences, but we're still family. Then, I don't know how you could embarrass me like that in court. Then, you could have handled this privately. I didn't answer. I had nothing to say to a man who forged my name and tried to steal my house. When he realized I wasn't going to respond, Melissa stepped in. Her message came in the form of a typed letter, mailed in a cream-colored envelope like it was something formal. Inside was a page-long guilt trip. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just lines like, Robert's been under a lot of pressure, and, I'm sure George wouldn't have wanted the family torn apart. She even had the nerve to close the letter with, please remember you're not alone. I folded the paper, placed it back in the envelope, and dropped it in the trash. They still believed they had some control over me, but they were wrong. I spent the following days organizing the house. George had been a man of routine. Every document, every key, every receipt had a place. I found more folders hidden in the attic and 2 safety deposit keys in an envelope labeled, Susan, use only if needed. I opened both boxes at the bank the next day. One held his military records and the title to the Clearwater lot. The other held photos, letters, and a backup copy of the will. George had prepared for everything. What he hadn't prepared for was how cruel our own son could become. Alan called a few days later with an update. They haven't filed an appeal yet, he said, but they've been shopping around for new counsel. I've seen 2 different junior lawyers request access to the public court files. Can they appeal the ruling? I asked. Technically, yes, but the case was solid. The judge's ruling was based on clear evidence. No appellate court will overturn that unless they find procedural errors. So what happens if they try? We respond. But honestly, I think they're looking for leverage. They want to pressure you into settling, into giving something up just to get peace. I didn't say anything, because deep down, I knew that was exactly what they were doing. The following Sunday, I was pulling weeds from the backyard flower bed when I heard a knock at the front door. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked around the house. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was Melissa. She stood on the porch in designer sunglasses, holding a tote bag and smiling like we were old friends. I thought I'd stop by, she said. I didn't open the screen door. I'm Busse. I just want to talk. No, Iraplia. You want to negotiate. She hesitated. Look, I know things got tense, but this doesn't have to stay ugly. Robert's willing to walk away from the house if you just help him with the down payment on something new. A clean break. Istertahia. He tried to take this house from me. He forged my name. She waved her hand. He made mistakes. We all did. But dragging this out hurts everyone. No, I said. It only hurts you. She lowered her sunglasses. Her voice got sharp. Don't act like you're the victim. You could have kept this in the family. Instead, you made it public. I defended myself. You didn't expect that. Melissa's smile vanished. She reached into her tote and pulled out a thick manila envelope. You'll want to read this, she said. It's from Robert. I took it without answering. She turned and walked back to her car without another word. I didn't open the envelope until that night. Inside were printouts of emails between Robert and George, selected messages, cherry-picked to make it look like George had considered gifting him the house. There were also character references Robert had written about himself, as if trying to paint a picture of a loyal son who'd simply been misunderstood. It was a last-ditch effort. I sent the envelope straight to Alan. He called me the next morning. This is useless, he said. The emails don't change anything. George had every right to discuss options before finalizing the will. None of this proves coercion. It's all posturing. Can we make them stop? I asked. No, but we can make it harder for them. That same week, Alan filed a cease and desist order, citing ongoing harassment and attempts to undermine a legally validated will. It wouldn't stop them from sending letters, but it gave us formal grounds to pursue legal action if they escalated. And then they did. I came home from the grocery store one afternoon to find the mailbox wide open. Someone had torn through every envelope. Some were missing. I checked the front door camera and found a 30-second clip of a shadowy figure pulling mail out in a hoodie. Robert. You'd think he would have learned by now. I called the sheriff's office and filed a report. The deputy who came out was polite but firm. If you have the footage, we'll investigate, but you should consider installing an alarm system. I already had. George and I had set it up years ago, but I upgraded it the next day. Melissa called again 2 days later. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. We didn't want it to go this far, Susan, but if you don't cooperate, Robert's going to file for financial compensation. All the support he gave George during treatment, all the time he sacrificed, he deserves something. I played the message twice, then saved it and sent it to Alan. He responded almost immediately. That's extortion, he said. We're documenting everything. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the block button. Then I did it. I blocked Melissa. I blocked Robert. I deleted their contact info, removed them from my email filters, and cleaned out the voicemail inbox. They weren't family anymore. They were just people who had tried to take what wasn't theirs. That night, I sat on the back porch, wrapped in a light sweater, drinking tea. The house was quiet. No arguing voices. No hidden documents. No fake kindness. Just quiet. For the first time since George passed, the house felt like mine again. But I knew it wasn't over yet. They weren't done. 3 weeks passed without a single message from Robert or Melissa. No calls. No voicemails. No letters. At first, I thought they had given up. I let myself believe, for just a moment, that the silence meant it was over. But then the letter from the IRS arrived. It was addressed to me, Susan Harris, but the contents didn't make sense. A notification regarding a change in ownership of the Clearwater lot, the same lot that George had left to me in his will. The paperwork claimed the transfer had been initiated 6 weeks prior. I sat at the kitchen table and read every line twice, then 3 times. Someone had submitted a transfer request using my name. My stomach sank. I called Alan immediately and scanned him a copy of the letter. This is new, he said. They're getting desperate. Can they really do that? Again? Only if someone forged your signature again, or if they claimed power of attorney, which you never gave them. I haven't signed anything. I haven't spoken to them. Alan sighed. Then we're looking at another fraud case. He contacted the IRS and submitted a dispute, along with the court ruling that confirmed the Clearwater property was mine. I filed a police report that same day. A detective was assigned to the case, and I gave them everything. Court documents, letters, voicemails, even the footage from the mailbox incident. The detective's name was Officer Mendez. She was sharp, direct, and didn't waste time. I'll be honest with you, she said during our first meeting. Familial fraud cases are tricky, but you have clear documentation. If we can trace the request back to a digital origin or a notarization point, we'll push for charges. A week later, she called back. It was filed online, from an IP address linked to Melissa's work laptop. I felt a rush of something I hadn't expected, relief mixed with anger. Not even surprise anymore, just confirmation. They're trying to wear you down, Officer Mendez added. It's pressure. They're hoping if they hit you from enough angles, you'll cave and give them something just to make it stop. but I wouldn't. I had already given them decades. They weren't getting anything else. That night, I reopened George's envelope, the original one, the letter he left me. I read it again slowly. His voice felt closer when I read it out loud. He had known. Somehow, he had seen this coming. Trust no one, especially not Robert. I closed the letter and put it back in its place. 2 days later, Robert finally showed up again, this time, in person. It was just afternoon. I was in the garden trimming back the hedges when I heard the front gate click. He didn't call out. He just stood at the edge of the yard, hands in his pockets. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. He looked tired, unshaven. There were bags under his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled. I walked to the edge of the walkway and crossed my arms. "You're not supposed to be here. I just want 5 minutes. I don't trust anything that comes out of your mouth anymore." He looked at the ground. "I know, I deserve that." I didn't reply. "I didn't know Melissa did that with the IRS, he said. "That wasn't me." "That doesn't matter," I said. "You knew what she was capable of, and you still backed her. You forged my name, twice." He hesitated, then looked up. "You won, okay? You got the house. You got everything." "No, I got back what was already mine." He shifted his weight. "We're losing the apartment. We're months behind on rent. That's not my problem. Dad would have helped me." "Dad did help you, for years. We both did. And you turned on both of us the minute you saw a shortcut." His voice rose slightly. "I just wanted something of my own. You tried to take something that was never yours." We stood there in silence for several seconds. Then he asked, "Would you ever consider?" "No," I said, before he could finish. "I wouldn't." I turned and walked back into the house. He didn't follow. That evening, I emailed Alan and told him about the visit. He updated our file with a formal notice of trespass and submitted it to the police to attach to the active fraud report. Officer Mendez called the next morning. "If he comes back, we'll issue a formal no-contact order." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dining room. There was still a weight on my chest. Not fear, just exhaustion. Not because they had almost taken everything, but because it had taken me this long to realize I had allowed it. That weekend, I took a drive out to Clearwater. I hadn't visited the lot since George passed. It wasn't developed, just an open stretch of land near the woods, with a small gravel driveway leading up to a clearing we always talked about turning into a cabin one day. I parked the car, stepped out, and stood in the middle of the lot for a long time. The sun was warm, the air smelled clean, there was no noise except for the wind and the rustling of leaves. George had wanted this to be mine, not because of the value, not because of the land, but because it was supposed to be a place for peace, a place untouched by the rest of the world. And finally, it was. Back at the house, I packed up the last of Robert's belongings, old trophies, childhood drawings, boxes he had never even unpacked since college. I didn't throw them away. I didn't burn them or break them. I just boxed them, labeled them, and dropped them at the front desk of his apartment building. No note, no explanation, just closure. The next morning, I received an official email from the IRS confirming that the fraudulent transfer attempt had been flagged, reversed, and noted on the case file. The property was secure. Melissa didn't try again, not because she had learned her lesson, but because now she knew someone was watching. Alan called a few days later. "Unless they file something else, you're done. You're fully protected now." I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just nodded and said, "Thank you." But inside, I knew something had changed. It wasn't just the end of a legal process. It was the end of being afraid. The house felt different now. Lighter. Like George had come back in some invisible way, not physically, but through every protected detail, every warning he left, every document he stored. He knew who they were. Now I did too. And I wasn't going to let them in again. It took months before I allowed myself to rest. After the IRS reversal, after the court ruling was finalized, and after the police closed the fraud report citing conclusive evidence of attempted financial deception, I found myself waking up each day and not immediately reaching for paperwork. I wasn't waiting for another letter, or another call, or another knock at the door. For the first time in over a year, I was living without watching my back. The house became mine again in the ways that mattered. I had the locks changed one final time, replaced the front door that Robert had always slammed, and repainted the living room. I took down Melissa's curtains and donated them to a local shelter. I ordered new ones, plain white with soft gray trim, like George used to like. Quiet, clean, without pretense. I boxed up the old reminders and stored them in the attic. Wedding photos where Robert was still a boy, family vacation albums that had started to feel staged. I didn't throw them out, but I didn't want to see them every day anymore. I wasn't angry, not in the loud, bitter way people expect. I was just done. One Saturday morning in early spring, I was sweeping the front porch when a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Robert. It was a silver sedan, newer model. Out stepped two girls, maybe 11 or 12. I recognized them immediately, my granddaughters, Lily and Caroline. I hadn't seen them in over a year. Melissa had cut contact with me after the ruling. Robert never mentioned the girls again. I had assumed they'd been told I was out of the picture, that I didn't want to see them, maybe worse. But here they were, standing awkwardly at the edge of the driveway. Caroline took a step forward. Grandma. I set the broom aside and walked down the steps slowly, unsure of what this was. Hi, I said softly. Does your mother know you're here? She dropped us off at the corner, Lily said. Said we could walk the rest of the way. I frowned. Does your father know? They looked at each other. Then Caroline said, he said it was up to us. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected to see them again, not without a battle. And now they were just here. Their backpacks were slung over their shoulders, and Caroline was holding something, a small photo album, one I hadn't seen in years. Can we come in? Lily asked. Just for a little while? I opened the door. They followed me inside, quiet and polite. They walked through the house slowly, like they were trying to remember it. I made them hot chocolate and we sat at the kitchen table. Caroline opened the album and laid it flat. Inside were pictures of George holding them as babies, of the girls in the garden helping me pull weeds, of the picnic we'd had out at Clearwater the summer before George got sick. They didn't say much. They didn't ask questions about the court case, or their parents, or why they hadn't seen me in so long. Instead, they looked at the photos, and then at me. Mom said you didn't want us around, Lily said, barely above a whisper. I kept my voice steady. That's not true. I never stopped wanting to see you. But some things happened that made it hard. Adult things. They nodded. They were old enough to understand that families didn't always stay the same. Is Grandpa still buried at the lake? Caroline asked. Yes, I said. Next to the bench he built. Can we visit sometime? I nodded. Of course. They stayed for an hour. I sent them home with sandwiches and leftover cookies. I didn't press them about their parents. I didn't ask when they'd come again. I just hugged them both at the door and told them they were always welcome. After they left, I stood at the sink for a long time, staring at the two empty mugs. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was something else. A small thread of connection that hadn't been broken after all. Weeks went by, then months. The girls began coming regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes together. Never with Melissa, never with Robert. We didn't talk about the lawsuit, or the forged documents, or the fraud reports. They just came to visit, to draw, to help in the garden, to sit in the sunroom and talk about school. Robert never called. Melissa didn't write again. Alan confirmed the case was closed permanently. The Clearwater lot was secure, the deed to the house was in order, and every false filing had been reversed or purged. Officer Mendez sent a final report and said charges would remain suspended unless they attempted further action. They didn't. One afternoon, I sat in the backyard reading when Caroline walked out holding an envelope. It was unmarked. I found this in the mailbox, she said. Inside was a letter, handwritten, from Robert. It was short. Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me, and I don't deserve forgiveness, but I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I was wrong. About everything. I let her convince me of things I knew weren't true. I lost more than just a house. I lost you. And I think about that every day. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beneath the phone. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I was still angry. But because sometimes peace means not going back. I had fought hard for what was mine. For what George left behind. For my own name, my own life, my own dignity. And I had won. Not in court, not on paper, but in silence. In the way my hands didn't shake anymore when I opened the mailbox. In the way I slept through the night without worry. In the way I said no, and meant it. And most of all, in the way the next generation, Lily and Caroline, found their way back to me, on their own, without noise, without manipulation, without needing anything except the truth. That was the ending George wanted for me, and now, I had it.